Hello, my name is Spoot Magood, and welcome to my proof of concept sort of test. So, I have a theory that it might be engaging to experience live reading, sort of like how there are live video gaming playthroughs, like live reading and responding to and commentating on books and articles and stuff that you're reading together. And there could be a chat feature, comments. You could cut it up and put it on YouTube, and make sure that it is, meeting copyright, like for educational purposes, and then usually doesn't require royalties of any kind. So I would love for the first book to read by the New Press. It's called Copaganda: How the Police and the Media Manipulate Our News by Alec Karakatsanis. Alec Karakatsanis. And let's see here. It describes this book as, in this groundbreaking expose essential for understanding rising authoritarianism, award-winning civil rights lawyer Alec Karakatsanis introduces the concept of Copaganda. Oh yeah, and then I'm playing some music in the background because I thought it would be enjoyable. It is an hour of Celtic harp music by Adrian von Ziegler. So we'll see if there's a copyright issue with that. Copaganda is a special kind of propaganda employed by police, prosecutors, and news media to stoke fear of police-recorded crime and distort society's response to it. What readers will discover: how mass media manipulates our perception of what keeps us safe, why fear of poor people, strangers, immigrants, unhoused people, and people of color is deliberately cultivated, the ways this fear leads to authoritarian repression, inequality, and massive profits for the punishment bureaucracy. Why it matters for readers of Naomi Klein and Noam Chomsky. Ooh, he was in the Epstein files. Copaganda shows how modern news coverage fuels insecurity and distracts us from policies that would truly improve lives and make us safer, like reducing inequality, expanding housing, and investing in healthcare, early childhood education, and climate-friendly city planning. Hidden in plain sight. When your local TV station obsessively reports on shoplifting but ignores wage theft, tax evasion, and environmental pollution. When podcasts talk about a shortage of prison guards rather than too many people in prison. When newspapers quote experts calling for more money for police and prisons despite scientific evidence to the contrary. About the author. Recognized by Teen Vogue as one of the most prominent voices on issues of law and justice, Alec Karakatsanis combines sharp legal expertise, trenchant political analysis, and humorous storytelling to transform the way we consume information. The result, a hopeful path forward towards a healed humanity and a media system invested in real public safety and equality. Doesn't that just sound so good? I was like, dang, I really want to read this. So, I figure let's do it. So I downloaded the book, and I would have done it from my library if I was able to, but there was like a couple weeks wait. So if you can, talk to your library about de-Amazoning and figuring out how to actually purchase ebooks instead of relying on the subscription model services, because that is why the wait times are so long. Is literally Amazon and stuff are you can only have one license to this book, and in reality it's digital. It could be infinite. There's no added cost for producing additional copies of it. They're just nickel and diming and stinging the libraries because they want to privatize the public libraries. And I saw a terrifying example of that earlier when I tried to download the book. And what was it called? I got oh God, it was called... It was based in the UK, which I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. Perlego, Perlego. Do not sign up for it. Do not look into it. It's literally a subscription service, like pays 87 cents a day or whatever for access to the fucking library, essentially, of books. But it's a privatized library. Oh my God, disgusting. Okay, anyways, I had to rant about that. Back to the book. Also by Alec Karakatsanis, Unusual Cruelty, the Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. Oh, sounds like he's got a good little library of books we could read. Copaganda, How Police and the Media Manipulate Our News. New Press. And that's the table of contents. Introduction. What is Copaganda? If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. Malcolm X. Damn, we started off strong. That was a great opening. On the morning of June 20th, 2023, I stood outside the Genesee County Jail in Flint, Michigan. Like nearly every jail in the United States, the one in downtown Flint mostly detains people who are presumed innocent and awaiting their day in court. Most of them are jailed solely because their families do not have the cash to pay for their release. Many of them will never be convicted of anything. The U.S. and the Philippines are the only two countries that use for-profit cash bail companies to determine which human beings are confined to jail cells before trial and which human beings can go home to their families. Spitting bars. In 2014, the Genesee County Jail banned in-person family visits. It prohibited children from visiting their incarcerated parents, spouses from visiting their partners, and parents from visiting their children. While many human beings take for granted the ability to hug their mother or kiss their child on the forehead or look into the eyes of their lover, people in Flint could not. That morning, I took a photograph. It shows the sidewalk outside the jail, where children had written messages of love and drawn hearts and flowers in chalk for their parents. From the jail windows, parents could see the drawings and press their faces to the glass, hand signaling hearts and other love symbols back down to their kids. Oh God, this is... Oh, it's got the pictures. Oh God. Why was this happening? Since the early 2010s, many U.S. jails eliminated free in-person family visits when they signed contracts, oh, there it is, with the multi-billion-dollar prison and jail telecommunications industry. I can't believe this is true. And this is literally what they've been instituting in like Delaney Hall and the other ICE facilities too. So like you have to pay to talk to your family member, like, and supposedly they like seriously upcharge it. And like nobody hears about it because like, you know, they just deal with it privately as a family, like this cost of like having to take on all these financial burdens just to talk to your family member in prison. Like, oh my God. Which is largely owned by private equity companies. Oh, there it is, the private equity connection. They are destroying our country. The theory was if jails get rid of free in-person visits, desperate people will spend more money on phone and video calls to stay connected with their loved ones. Oh. The companies got monopolies on calls at each jail through contracts they negotiated with sheriffs. By locking in high exclusive rates, they made hundreds of millions of dollars each year from the denial of human contact, and the contracts promised sheriffs a percentage of the profits. In return, many of the contracts required sheriffs to end free in-person visits and also required that the government keep the jail population above a specified minimum capacity to ensure a large enough market. You need to imprison people, cops, keep them in jail for longer so that we can make money off of them by denying them access to their loved ones and their loved ones access to them, whether or not they're guilty of a crime. Because remember, this is pre-bail, pre-hearing. We have not determined that these people are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Oh my God. The Genesee County Sheriff, Chris Swanson, achieved national fame after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. On May 30th, 2020, Sheriff Swanson put down his weapon and walked with protesters in Flint, declaring that police love them, With cameras rolling, he pointed at a fellow police officer and told the protesters, "That cop over there hugs people." Well, that was weird. A few years later, he would be a featured primetime speaker at the Democratic National Convention that nominated Kamala Harris for president. National news stories did not mention that the hug-loving sheriff had banned family visits, nor did they mention that he was collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars every year from the families of people he detained before trial, a disproportionate number of whom were Black and extremely poor. Shit. Internal documents that my organization, Civil Rights Corps, obtained before we sued Swanson on behalf of children in Flint show that the contract he negotiated generates huge profits for the sheriff's office and the telecom monopoly, even though research shows that eliminating visits makes both the jail and society at large less safe. My guys, you guys. But as one county official put it in an internal email, a lot of people will swipe that MasterCard. Children in Flint could no longer hug their parents because some people were making a lot of money, not because our society is better for it. Swanson was not alone. In the days after George Floyd was murdered, news stories across the country appeared depicting police in city after city kneeling, marching beside, and even dancing the Macarena with protesters. Local news quoted Louisiana Sheriff Sid Gautreaux saying he was, quote, sickened and heartbroken to see such callous disregard for another human being. The news reports of his compassion did not mention that more than 40 human beings had died in Gautreaux's secretive jail between 2012 and 2020, or that sheriffs in Louisiana take a percentage cut of every cash bail posted. You're kidding me. So it's like they're just like con men, like gangsters, you know? Like, you give us the money, you get your loved one. Like, ugh. The day after Swanson declared that police love and want to hug racial justice protesters in Flint, former Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo removed his COVID-19 mask and appeared on the verge of crying as he offered reporters a chance to film his police escort to the funeral home for Floyd's body. The Houston Police Department updated its profile picture on social media to display Floyd's image. The coverage of Acevedo did not mention that Houston area police had harassed, handcuffed, and caged Floyd repeatedly for years. Oh, dude, they literally knew him. Like, oh my God. Ultimately prompting his relocation to Minnesota. So they harassed him so much, he moved, George Floyd moved to Minneapolis to avoid the, oh my God, fuck, man. In search of a better life. While Chief Acevedo was grandstanding about his compassion for Floyd, he was quietly refusing to release video footage of 6 fatal Houston police shootings over a 6-week period, the final one occurring on the same day Floyd was killed. Shame. There is a gulf between the image and the reality of the punishment bureaucracy. Copaganda creates that gulf. It is the system of government and news media propaganda that promotes mass incarceration, justifies the barbarities and profits that accompany it, and distorts our sense of what threatens us and what keeps us safe. Once again, just absolutely spitting bars. Like, it's just such clear language and like so beautiful to read. Watching police public relations officials across the country use the news media to portray themselves as social justice defenders after the murder of George Floyd marked a turning point in my career. It was an important time for Copaganda, a rare moment when police, prosecutors, and prisons were vulnerable to exposure and mass rejection. More than a decade of widespread criticism against mass incarceration had made criminal justice reform a bipartisan issue. State and federal prison populations had been decreasing since 2009, and Michelle Alexander's thesis in her best-selling The New Jim Crow, that mass incarceration was a contemporary form of systemic racial oppression, had become conventional wisdom among liberals due to all that reading, which you're doing right now. Oh, we're a threat to the system. You're damn right we are, because we're going to stop this shit. Had become conventional wisdom among liberals. During the first 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of people in local jails dropped by 200,000 after advocates successfully pressured local officials to prioritize public health. Mass movements led by the police, movements led by the people most harmed by police and prisons led to Black Lives Matter protests in 2014 and 2015, and then in 2020, the largest protests in U.S. history. Up until the No King stuff, ayy. Between 15 and 26 million people took to the streets in the first few weeks after the police murdered George Floyd. In one major poll taken the week after the murder, 54% of Americans said that the burning of a Minneapolis police precinct was either fully or partially justified. Hell yeah. Calls to reduce the size and power of the punishment bureaucracy were ubiquitous, especially among young people and a new wave of political candidates running on that platform. It was in that moment of mass movement, public consciousness, and potential change that I began to focus on how the news media supports the punishment bureaucracy. I had always been critical of how the news manufactures consent for inequality and oppression. To use Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky's phrase, from their landmark examination of the political economy of the mass media. But news media reactions to the 2020 uprisings alarmed me. Without subtlety or pretense to objectivity, the news seemed eager to undercut growing public consciousness about the failures of the punishment bureaucracy, and to endorse a worldview that, by contrast, legitimized and valorized it. That is so true, and also such a good way of putting it. And so starting in June 2020, I began to archive news stories on the punishment bureaucracy and to study the vested interests that use the news to shape the way we think about crime, safety, and the legal system. Punishment bureaucrats understand something important. The news affects what and who we are afraid of, and in turn, which solutions we conjure to meet those fears. Once I started looking more closely, I saw propaganda everywhere in coverage of crime and safety. In the aftermath of the 2020 uprisings, the news stoked a society-wide panic about one kind of crime or another, despite police statistics demonstrating that we were, and still are, living in a period with among the lowest number of police-recorded crimes in modern U.S. history. These manufactured panics were not focused on all crimes, but on specific crimes that the news associated with poor people, strangers, immigrants, and people of color. And most striking of all, story after story built up a consensus, one utterly contrary to scientific evidence, that giving more money to the punishment bureaucracy was the only serious solution to achieve public safety. I started asking myself questions that became themes of this book. Why is this story news? Why are other potential stories about things that harm us not in the news? How did this story get to this reporter? Who are the sources interviewed, and who counts as an expert? Whose perspective is included in this story, and whose perspective is left out? Who benefits from how the story is framed, and what words are used? From what facts did the reporter tell us, and from what the reporter ignores? What kind of person is created by consuming today's news about crime and punishment? Oh my gosh, these are great questions. Holy cow. I started to document patterns of how news coverage makes us afraid of certain people, fails to inform us of the things actually most likely to harm us, and misleads us about what kinds of social policies best promote human flourishing. I worked with crime survivors, scholars, community organizers, students, people in jail and prison, and the families most targeted by the punishment bureaucracy to study the reality of public safety, that the key to reducing interpersonal harm is addressing the underlying causes of interpersonal harm and violence. Who would have thought? By investing in things like education, housing, healthcare, human connection, and reducing inequality. Yet I saw over and over again how news outlets distort and obscure this reality. I began collecting a public archive of propaganda on social media and producing hundreds of threads and dozens of essays in a newsletter to illustrate how propaganda operates with daily examples. I met with hundreds of reporters, editors, producers, and news executives, and I was invited to provide trainings for some of the most prominent news outlets in the country. This book documents some of what I found and learned. Dang. Documenting propaganda was a very personal project, and I want to say something about my own biases. I began my career as a public defender in Alabama and Washington, D.C., representing people who could not afford an attorney. Then, as now, the US was confining people to cages at 6 times its own historical average, 5 to 10 times as much as comparable countries, and caging black people at 6 times the rate of South Africa during apartheid. I saw firsthand, in a way that I had not understood from books and law school, the sheer scope of the bureaucracy required to remove millions of people from their homes, schools, churches, jobs, and families, and to transfer them into government-run courtrooms and cells. I also saw how the punishment bureaucracy transformed many of us working within it. Damn. In 2013, I was fortunate to receive a grant from Harvard Law School that enabled me to quit my job and start a nonprofit organization that uses civil rights laws to challenge injustices in the punishment bureaucracy. I finally had the resources to take a deeper look at the punishment assembly line and to try to do something about it. I made that career shift because I care about all people being safe. Unnecessary violence, both violence perpetrated by the government and violence that exists because of our collective failure to promote the policies that will address it. Such good writing. Has killed many of my clients and has caused me and many people I care about to suffer enormously. If the US had imprisonment rates comparable to other countries today, or like those the US itself had before 1980, US life expectancy would be almost 2 years longer than it is now. Hundreds of millions of human life years are lost because of our society's unparalleled focus on attacking social problems through punishment. I've now been a civil rights lawyer for more than a decade, filing lawsuits and developing policies that challenge widespread violations of the Constitution. The organization I started, Civil Rights Corps, grew to over 35 employees. Our cases have ended modern debtors' prisons in many cities, in which tens of thousands of people were jailed for non-payment of debts. Oh my God. Gotten hundreds of thousands of people out of jail who were or would have been illegally detained before trial solely because their families were poor. Prevented hundreds of thousands of illegal convictions. Prevented tens of thousands of families from being separated. Shut down companies profiting from illegally extorting people for cash with threats of jail. Turned tens of millions of dollars to tens of thousands. Returned tens of millions of dollars to tens of thousands of the poorest people in our society. Shit. Vindicated the rights of sexual assault, domestic abuse, and gun violence survivors when prosecutors illegally threatened them. Oh my God. Won civil rights cases against dozens of police officers for brutality and corruption. Enabled the return of driver's licenses to hundreds of thousands of people who had been unable to drive anywhere because they owed debts. Whoa. Played a role in blocking several $billion in new investments in policing and prisons. Saved local governments hundreds of millions of dollars that they would have spent on jailing, and successfully sued more judges than anyone I am aware of in US history. Dang, those are some serious creds. And yet, despite the success of our civil rights cases, and even greater successes of many other advocates, a core myth persists that the punishment bureaucracy is primarily concerned with and effective at producing public safety. That myth, which is consistently pushed in the news, has allowed the punishment bureaucracy to resist significant change and even to expand into new areas. Time and again, after our legal victories exposed corruption, ineffectiveness, and illegal government violence, the bureaucrats who created the problem would propose a solution that simply refashioned the profitable status quo. Similar injustice, new label. My years as an advocate for my indigent clients and their families led me to believe that things could be different if the news told different stories in different ways. Damn. Who benefits from Copaganda? Copaganda is a specific type of propaganda in which the punishment bureaucracy and the powerful interests behind it influence how we think about crime and safety. I use the term punishment bureaucracy instead of criminal justice system in this book because it is a more accurate and less deceptive way to describe the constellation of public and private institutions that develop, enforce, and profit from criminal law. Damn. The government determines what things are considered a crime, subject to punishment, versus what things are permitted or tolerated, even if they hurt people. Then the government determines what kinds of punishments are appropriate for the conduct it prohibits. Across history and different societies, the definition of crime and how it should be punished has varied depending on who has power and what serves their interests, not an objective evaluation on what causes harm. The following questions illustrate my point. Is it a crime to take food from a grocery store chain without paying for it if you're hungry? To terminate a pregnancy? To sleep on the subway or in a park? To beg on a sidewalk? To ingest a substance so that you can feel better? To belong to a union? To refuse to grant mortgages to Catholics? To charge high interest rates? To steal your employees' wages? To drill for oil? To release toxic liquids into the water? To seize land from indigenous people? To participate in a lynch mob? To enslave people? To fire someone from a job based on their sexual orientation? To evict someone from their home for complaining about mold? To sexually harass someone at work? To hoard wealth? To decide not to vote? To abuse a family dog? To abuse thousands of pigs to make higher profits from their flesh? To donate money to a politician with the expectation that they will approve a real estate deal? To refuse to identify oneself to a police officer? To expose secret government misdeeds in the media? To hit one's child? To boycott apartheid? To design voting boundaries based on race? To charge someone overdraft fees and change the order of their transactions to rack up more overdraft fees? To run a bank for profit? To raise the price on a life-saving medication after purchasing a monopoly on it? To force sex upon a spouse? To search a person without probable cause? To grow tobacco? To have oral sex with another consenting adult? To hold profits offshore? To sag your pants? To possess a gun? To possess a hunting rifle 10 years after a marijuana conviction? The powerful define crime to suit their interests, making some things legal and others punishable. They also decide how what is criminalized gets punished. Should the government execute or cage or whip people who break a law? Should the government mandate a public apology, permit survivors to initiate restorative processes, seize assets, require volunteer work, revoke a business or driver's license, confine someone to their home, banish them? Should society show them love and give them help? Should society instead invest more in preventing certain harms from happening in the first place? Having defined crime and punishment, the government also determines which crimes to enforce against which people. Law enforcement rarely responds to most violations of the law. It only enforces some criminal laws against some people some of the time. These decisions, too, follow patterns of power, not safety. That is why U.S. police chose for many years to arrest more people for marijuana possession than all violent crime combined. That is why police prioritize budgets for SWAT teams to search for drugs in poor communities over testing rape kits. That is why the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office responded to proposed county budget cuts by threatening to cut the divisions that handle white-collar crimes and sexual abuse. That is why about 90% of people prosecuted for crimes are very poor. That is why no senior figures were prosecuted for the 2008 financial crisis or the U.S. torture program after 9/11. That is why police tolerate widespread drug use in dorms at Ivy League universities. That is why most of the undercover police operations in hundreds of U.S. cities target disproportionately Black, Hispanic, and immigrant people instead of other police officers, prosecutors, real estate developers, fraternities with histories of drug distribution and rape, or corporate boardrooms with histories of tax evasion, fraud, and insider trading. That is why a playground fight at a low-income school results in a child being taken away from their parents and jailed with a criminal record, while the same fight at a prep school may result in a call to parents for an early pickup that afternoon. In an unequal society where a few have more money and power than the many, the punishment bureaucracy is a tool for preserving inequalities. It maintains the social order by using government violence to maintain the unrest that comes from unfairness, desperation, and alienation. And it crushes organized opposition against the political system. These functions explain why the punishment bureaucracy expands during times of growing inequality and social agitation. Throughout history, those who are comfortable with how society looks tend to preserve and expand the punishment bureaucracy, even though and largely because it operates as an anti-democratic force. Those who have wanted to change certain aspects of our society, such as movements for workers, racial justice, women's suffrage, economic equality, peace, ecological sustainability, immigrant rights, LGBTQ rights, and so on, have tended throughout history to combat the size, power, and discretion of the punishment bureaucracy. Why? Because it is almost always wielded against them. A lot of punishment bureaucrats are involved in the system: police prosecutors, prison and jail guards, probation and parole officers, judges, and other government employees who design and carry out the system's policies. But the punishment bureaucracy has also been commercialized. Many people know about privatized prisons, but even bigger industries profit from nearly every aspect of the administration of public, human caging facilities, including medical care, food, telephone calls, digitized mail, cash transfer systems, education, tablets for entertainment, so-called treatment programs, and prison industries that make profits for the world's largest corporations with modern-day slave labor. This commercial sector reaches far beyond the walls of our privatized prisons and jails. Companies profit from manufacturing guns, jail cells, detention centers, handcuffs, tasers, batons, uniforms, body armor, tanks, license plate readers, body cameras, facial recognition software, chemical weapons, and military equipment used by the police. A multi-billion-dollar industry profits from discretionary arrest and pretrial release decisions by selling bail bonds. Oh boy. Companies make even larger profits from surveillance equipment, software, training programs, drug tests, electronic monitors, car towing schemes, police auctions of seized property, private halfway houses, forensic consultants, big data databases, debt collection contracts, and case management systems for courts, prosecutors, police, probation, and parole departments and prisons. On top of all that, the police public relations industry rakes in money, while police unions, probation and parole officer unions, prison guard unions, and prosecutors unions maximize their members' wages, overtime, pensions, and benefits worth tens of billions of dollars. And why the fuck are they allowed to unionize? They're the ones with the fucking guns. I'm serious. Most broadly, there is a growing web of multinational consulting corporations who contract with police, prisons, border patrol, and military bureaucracies to help procure and market those commodities and services. Oh, brother. The fact that many people benefit from mass incarceration does not necessarily mean that all punishment bureaucrats are cynical profiteers, although many of them are. The range of people who depend on the punishment bureaucracy for their livelihoods has created an ideological foundation that enables many of them to believe that their role in the bureaucracy makes our society safer. Professional bureaucrats themselves consume and believe Copaganda, and they make some of its best ambassadors. So how does Copaganda work? It has three main roles. Job number 1, narrowing our understanding of the threat. The first job of Copaganda is to narrow our conception of threat. Rather than the bigger threats to our safety caused by people with power, we narrow our conception to crimes committed by the poorest, most vulnerable people in our society. For example, wage theft by employers dwarfs all other property crime combined, such as burglaries, retail theft, and robberies, costing an estimated $50 billion every year. Tax evasion steals about $1 trillion each year. That's over 60 times the wealth lost in all police-reported property crime. There are hundreds of thousands of known Clean Water Act violations each year, causing cancer, kidney failure, rotting teeth, damage to the nervous system, and death. Over 100,000 people in the United States die every year from air pollution, about 5 times the number of homicides. Holy mackerel. At the same time, most sexual assaults, domestic violence crimes, and sex offenses against children go unreported, unrecorded, and ignored by the legal system. Punishment bureaucrats feed reporters stories that measure safety as any short-term increase or decrease in, say, official homicide or robbery rates, rather than by how many people died from lack of health care, how many children suffered lead poisoning, how many families were rendered homeless by eviction or foreclosure, and how many people couldn't pay utility bills because of various white-collar crimes. Wow, how many thousands of illegal assaults police and jail guards committed, and so on. Sometimes the rates of various crimes go up and down. We should all be concerned about any form of violence against any human being. But the first job of Copaganda is getting us focused almost exclusively on a narrow range of the threats we face, mostly the officially recorded crimes of poor people, rather than the large-scale devastation wrought by people with power and money. Holy mackerel. Job number 2, manufacturing fear. The second job of Copaganda is to manufacture crises and panics about this narrow category of threats. After the 2020 George Floyd uprisings, for example, the news bombarded the public with a series of crime waves concerning various forms of crime committed by the poor, even though government data showed that, despite some categories of police-reported crime rising and others falling at the beginning of the pandemic, overall property and violent crime continued to be at near historic 50-year lows the entire time. As a result of continual news-generated panics, nearly every year of this century, public opinion polls showed people believing that police-reported crime was rising, even when it was generally falling. Oh my God. Copaganda leaves the public in a vague state of fear. It manufactures suspicion against poor people, immigrants, and racial minorities rather than, say, bankers, pharmaceutical executives, fraternity brothers, landlords, employers, and polluters. Oh, hell yeah. Copaganda also engenders fear of strangers while obscuring the oppressive forces that lead to interpersonal violence between acquaintances, friends, and family members. Police themselves commit 1/3 of all stranger homicides in the U.S. Oh, but these figures are generally excluded from reported crime rates. Dang. This matters because when people are in a perpetual state of fear for their physical safety, they are more likely to support the punishment bureaucracy and authoritarian reactions against those they fear. Number 3, promoting punishment as the solution. The third job of Copaganda is to convince the public to spend more money on the punishment bureaucracy by framing police, prosecutors, probation, parole, and prisons as effective solutions to interpersonal harm. Copaganda links safety to things like the punishment bureaucracy does, while downplaying the connection between safety and the material, structural conditions of people's lives. So, for example, a rise in homeless people sleeping in the street might be framed as an economic problem requiring more affordable housing. But Copaganda frames it as a disorder, solvable with more arrests for trespassing. Instead of linking sexual assault to toxic masculinity or a lack of resources and vibrant social connections to escape high-risk situations, Copaganda links it to an under-resourced punishment system. Like a media-induced Stockholm syndrome, oh my God, Copaganda sells us the illusion that the violent abuser is somehow the liberator, the protector, our best and only option. If police, prosecutions, and prisons made us safe, we would be living in the safest society in world history. But as I discuss later, greater investment in the punishment bureaucracy actually increases a number of social harms, including physical violence, sexual harm, disease, trauma, drug abuse, mental illness, isolation, and even, in the long term, police-recorded crime. Instead, overwhelming evidence supports addressing the controllable things that determine the levels of interpersonal harm in our society, including poverty, lack of affordable housing, inadequate healthcare and mental wellness resources, nutrition, access to recreation and exercise, pollution, human and social connection, design of cities, buildings, and physical environments, and early childhood education. Oh. Addressing root causes like these would lower police-reported crime and also prevent the other harms that flow from inequality that never make it into the legal system for punishment, including millions of avoidable deaths and unnecessary suffering that exceed the narrow category of harm that police record as crime. Damn. The obsessive focus by news outlets on the punishment bureaucracy as a solution to interpersonal harm draws away resources from investment in the things that work better, along with a sense of urgency for those priorities. It also promotes the surveillance and repression of social movements that are trying to solve those root structural problems by fighting for a more equal and sustainable society. Copaganda thus contributes to a cycle in which the root causes of our safety problems never get solved, even though people in power constantly claim to be trying. Damn. As you read these examples collected in this book with the above 3 themes in mind, ask yourself, what kind of public is created by consuming such news? If we see one of these articles once, we may not notice anything odd, or we may shake our heads at how silly, uninformed, and nefarious it is. But if we see thousands of them over the course of years and we hardly see anything else, we become different people. It is the ubiquity of Copaganda that requires us to set up daily practices of individual and collective vigilance. Wow, that's really well said. This book focuses on Copaganda in the news. I'm not going to analyze other common types of Copaganda, including fictional Copaganda in television, movies, and music. Ooh. Cultural propaganda is all around us, from the CIA, starting in the 1950s, funding projects like the Iowa Writers' Workshop, or fronting literary magazines to influence modern journalism and fiction writing. Oh, we're getting into CIA shit! To the DEA paying Hollywood in the 1990s to insert drug war propaganda into popular television shows, to the vast array of police and military consultants who shape every fictional TV series, podcast, or movie that touches on crime. You guys. Shows like Cops and Law and Order have done a lot to distort society's understanding of what the punishment bureaucracy does. The creator of the latter, for example, explained that his goal was to help people understand that prosecutors were doing God's work. Oh, Lord help him. The NYPD even signed Spike Lee to a $219,113 marketing contract before he made his movie Black with a KKK Klansman, perhaps the most flagrant propaganda that I have ever seen because of its simplistic good-bad cop depictions and erasure of the systemic functions of the punishment bureaucracy. It's also a very bad movie, he said. I have not seen it, so I don't know. The entire genre of police procedurals mythologizes punishment bureaucracies and the allegedly sophisticated technologies they wield. And it's not just Hollywood. Fictional propaganda planned and paid for by the police and their industry allies is on TikTok and YouTube. What? And it's behind many community groups, online posts, neighborhood listserv emails, and charitable campaigns that seem genuine to the unassuming public. But all of that is beyond the scope of this book, which is about news coverage of crime and safety. Well, dang, though, I want to hear about the other stuff, too, at some point. Many of the lessons explored here, however, enable a more critical consumption of other kinds of propaganda, too. I also largely avoid self-consciously partisan right-wing media. The New York Post, Fox News, and a prodigious right-wing propaganda ecosystem are enormously influential, and they must be studied. But if I reference them, I will simply note similarities in ideology to what many people perceive to be more objective and trusted news. Although more mainstream news uses different words and methods, the ideologies and effects of its coverage are similar to a lot of right-wing media. The modest goal of this book is to reach people who do not have the goal of pushing society toward greater inequality and authoritarianism, and are instead open to understanding the world more honestly and working for a better one. I focus on the most prestigious corporate news outlets because their propaganda is often the most subtle and insidious, and because it is targeted at people who think of themselves as informed. These news outlets, such as the New York Times, also tend to set the agenda, to reflect the vibes and zeitgeist of people in power, and to play an important role in legitimating authoritarian repression amongst liberal elites. Get 'em! This should not be read as a judgment that crime stories in local TV news are not propaganda. To the contrary, the daily and nightly volume of crude local crime stories is perhaps the single most important feature of contemporary news propaganda. but my focus will mostly be on teasing out lessons from more sophisticated news sources that are also applicable to less sophisticated ones. And every example I discuss represents something pervasive that infects the larger world of media. It is chosen precisely because of its prevalence in the Copaganda ecosystem. Finally, this book is a creature of a particular moment. I analyze examples from the news about crime and safety from 2020 to 2024. This is not a comprehensive historical account of Copaganda or a scholarly work with new theories on the media. I attempt only to apply repeatable methods of critical thinking to news stories at a time when the punishment bureaucracy faced the greatest threat to its power in modern history through the George Floyd uprising, and at a time of rising domestic and global authoritarianism. So this was pre-second term Donald Trump that he wrote this. I took a second picture that day in front of the jail in downtown Flint. The second picture shows how the punishment bureaucracy responded to children's messages of love for their parents. Oh yeah, the chalk drawings on the sidewalk, who were jailed by the sheriff because their families could not make cash payments, and who were now forbidden to have family visits because of a telecom profit scheme. Employees emerged from the sheriff's office and hosed down the sidewalk. Of course they did. The vibrant chalk drawings of flowers and hearts were reduced to splotches of muted color, like an abstract expressionist representation of bureaucratic cruelty. Oh my God! Police had mangled the messages of love from children to their parents, a distortion of human truth that made me think about George Orwell's warning of an authoritarian propaganda apparatus so pervasive that it could challenge the notion that 2 and 2 make 4. But the children of Flint, who had come back again and again and again to redraw their messages, understood something important. The forceful denial of honest communication is the forceful denial of a meaningful life. Damn. But I'm interested why he chose that concept from Orwell's 1984, because I think there's also a part that says that it could make father turn against son, or like split up the nuclear family, essentially. And I think that would also be a really poignant, comparison to make here. Oh, and then there's the picture of the washed off sidewalk. Jeez. So that was the introduction. What is Copaganda? Wow. I mean, that was incredible. I'm very excited to read more of this book. And this stuff, like, overall wasn't really news to me, because I do tend to like watch a lot of like documentaries and like more I guess not anti-cop, but like challenge the authority kind of true crime. So I was kind of familiar with a lot of these concepts before, but like the scale, I think, is shocking, and just how deep and far it runs is shocking. Like I said, so I would like to see more evidence for a lot of his claims, which it sounds like he goes into in later chapters. So I'll be curious to cover that, because there were a lot of overbroad, like generalizing statements about what Copaganda is, what types of stories the news media covers. So I'd be really curious to dive into the actual examples and evidence that he provides. And yeah, I guess, so it also has me thinking about how prescient this will be to our current problems with authoritarian government, and like the rise of the police state, and like this whole like surveillance apparatus that's supposedly might be used against left-wing agitators, supposedly. And how this is sort of the building blocks of that slowly and over time. What else do I want to say about this? I guess I'm really excited that you're still here. And if you're interested in hearing more chapters of Copaganda, feel free to subscribe, like, and comment any questions or like commentary. I would love to hear what you think about this introduction, and looking forward to the series with y'all. And have a great rest of your night, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye-bye.